잘 들리세요?
네, 잘.
아이, 고맙습니다.
예, 잘 들립니다. 예, 예.
네.
한명호 교수님도 잘 들리세요?
네, 잘 들립니다.
네, 잘 들립니다. 감사합니다.
네, 감사합니다.
Okay, it's 2 o'clock, so we'll be starting
Recording
in a
in progress.
Okay, I hope you have enjoyed lunch break. Can you hear me okay? All right, now let's start our afternoon session. Let me introduce Professor Yang Yu-seok, who will be chairing the second session. Professor Yang Yu-seok is an emeritus professor at GSIS of Chung-Ang University. He served as a president of Korea Communication Agency, KCA. Also, he worked at the government, giving advice to the former president, Myung-Bak Lee. So let's give a warm welcome to Professor Yang Yu-seok.
Thank you very much, Professor Chun. As been introduced, my name is Yu Yan, and it's an honor for me to have a chairing this session, which is the topic of today's session is COVID-19 and inclusive education and ICT. Actually, the pandemic, today's topic, COVID-19, has actually devastated, damaged the public education systems, and particularly the inclusive education, which has been long campaigned by the international organizations like UNESCO, IBRD, and others. And despite the well-known importance of the IT or ICT infrastructure and deployment of mobile communication devices, the fundamental inequality in accessing quality mobile internet service has not been corrected at all in a relative sense. This session today covers the efforts and the experiences of South Korea in handling the crisis in public education COVID-19 has brought in. As you know well, South Korea has been recognized as a country having one of the world's best digital infrastructure and the extremely high level of aspiration for education. This is mainly due to the distorted college entrance system and the state-controlled uniform egalitarian education system. Before moving on to today's presentation and discussion, let me introduce today's panels briefly. We have four distinguished presenters. The first, Professor Young Lee from Hanyang University, and Mr. Chung-Ang, Director, Korea Education and Research Information Service, and Dr. Chun Woo-hyung, Professor of Chung-Ang University and a researcher in RCCG Research Center. RCCG means reconciliation and coexistence in contact zones. And the first presenter will be Professor Hyun Myung-ho, also from RCCG in Chung-Ang University. And we have also two panel discussants. Dr. Jin Sil-hee, professor at GSIS, Chung-Ang University, and Dr. Do Jae-woo, a research fellow in KEDI, the Korea Education Development Institute. Welcome all presenters and discussants to this session. And let me toss the presentation to Professor Lee Young from Hanyang University.
All right, so thank you for chairperson. So this is Young Lee at Hanyang University. I hope that you can hear me well, right? Okay, and I also put the slide. So can you see my slide? Okay, so let me present the paper I prepared. And I heard that I have around 20 minutes, right? Am I right? Okay, so let me go ahead. So the topic I want to present today is what happened to the educational inequality after this COVID-19. And unfortunately, the educational inequality actually increased after COVID-19 as we expected. So present some evidence for that and try to discuss some policy response to deal with this inequality in education. Okay, so all right. So I will start with some rapid expansion of online education everywhere in the world and try to conceptualize what would be the effect of this rapid expansion of online education. So that is section 1. And in section 2, I just quote several reports about this educational outcome after COVID-19. And then in section 3, I just quote some numbers from some study by the Ministry of Education in Korea about the primary and secondary education. And that clearly showed some kind of polarization of student score after COVID-19, okay? And the section 4, I myself, actually the data come from the courses I have taught. So the same course in 2019 and 2020, and I just compare some score distribution. And what I found in my class about this score is really polarization. So I just show you some density function of score. So that is section 4. And actually, the key section in today's presentation is actually section 5. So what would be the policy implication and how to deal with this polarization of student performance after this COVID-19? What would be optimal policy? And we have a very difficult challenge. And so I think I thank you for organizer of this symposium for very right time to discuss this some policy response to this aftermath of this COVID-19 in terms of education. Okay, so online education expanded quite rapidly. So I myself have taught every semester I'm teaching 2 courses, but for last 3 semesters, I taught everything online. Okay, we try some offline exam, but except for offline exam, all the classes I myself did online. And I feel a little bit uncomfortable when we teach all these courses online, because some interaction with the student is quite limited, and I'm not quite sure whether students are following, and it is not really easy to interact with the student. And I'm quite curious what would be the impact of this kind of online education. And unfortunately, as I mentioned already several times, some polarization of student performance. And I assume that that polarization coming from, mainly coming from student motivation. So say some student motivated, they can make use of this new technology. So they can perform better, okay? But on the other hand, there are some students who have, say, poor motivation, and some interaction, some kind of direct interaction with the instructor is quite limited, and then they actually lag behind. Okay, so that is, I guess, what's happened. Okay, so how to deal with this kind of phenomena? So that is today's topic, and some conceptualization of this interaction between teachers and the students, and so. This COVID-19 can affect the teachers' involvement, and that means less direct involvement. So I cannot approach student, even though I can have some kind of eye contact with student using this screen, right? So I can see Professor John, and I can see her eye, but that looking at her eyes doesn't give me the same degree of eye contact I had in the class, right? So quite limited. But this new technology allows some different method of learning. And that means, basically means, a simple thing is we record all the lectures. So students can watch this video again and again, and they can save time just looking at some section where he or she doesn't understand, and so on. And also more high-tech, some kind of artificial intelligence, we can provide more customized learning to students. So some more difficult questions to students who are doing quite well, but for students who are doing very badly, then we can just give more material, basic materials, so that he or she can study. So some personalization is possible after this kind of AI technology. So we have pros and cons. And using this online, basically effectiveness become small, I mean the lower. And as I mentioned earlier, I think key factor that can determine the student performance is motivation. So students who have strong motivation, they can take advantage of this new technology and they perform very well. On the other hand, say student who doesn't have a strong motivation, they just turn on the video, turn on this lecture, but doesn't pay any attention. So they lag behind. So motivation is very important. And also not only the interaction between teachers and the student, but also the interaction among students are hindered during this online education. So some peer group interaction is quite limited, and that also affect not only in terms of learning, but in terms of say fostering some creativity and fostering some social ability and so on. Okay, so that is what we have. And another aspect that can affect this online education is role of parents, role of family become more important. And what happened is basically starting this online education, we need the internet access and some device. And this internet access and the device depends on family income. And we also saw some news saying that this kind of some limited resource actually make this education in developing country more difficult than education in developed country. So that is happened. And also parents, some background, I mean the say more educated and the more motivated, the parents actually pay more attention to their children, and this parents attention can affect the student motivation and some performance. Okay, so that is what we see. So looking at just some report about this educational inequality after this COVID-19. So I start with US report. So US Department of Education report, and they look at this COVID-19, and not surprisingly, they found some disparate impact on this student performance. And in the United States, color is very important. So what they found is nearly a third of teachers in majority Black school report that their students lack the technology, access to the internet and some device. On the other hand, only 1 in 5 teachers said the same school which have a smaller number of Black have this kind of some difficulty in technology. Okay, so depending on this community and the family, this access is quite different. And some also looking at academic performance, they found that academic growth for many students of color actually lagging behind, and the gap between this student of color and the student of white actually increased after this COVID-19. Okay, so, and this is some news report actually about Korea. So One CNBC report said that reduce the interaction with the teachers, some digital distraction. I don't know exactly what digital distraction means but I suspect that some of my students during this online class, they watch something else. Just turn on this lecture video, but they do something else. And some technical difficulties are widening the education achievement gap among students. And yeah, that is what's happening right now. And another news, Korean Times report that a civic group, they look at some data coming from middle school and high school, and they found that number of students in the middle level achievement, so some middle level achievement, they shrink. So some polarization. So is that is happening. Okay. In section 3, I just quote one press release by the Ministry of Education in Korea. So this is a recent one. So I think 3 months ago, something. Okay. So Korea have some standardized exam for third grade in middle school and the second grade in high school. Try to look at some student performance. And it used to be a kind of a census, but now we have a sample of a student who take this exam. Okay, so 3 subjects: Korean, math, and English. And so this is an annual test, so we can compare before COVID-19 and after COVID-19. And what they found is not surprising, as we already seen many other countries and many other studies. What they found is the test score become lower, overall test score become lower, and the proportion of students doing very poorly increase after COVID-19. And but that is true for all the subjects, and also that is also true for third grader in middle school and the second grader in high school. Okay, so strong polarization and also deterioration of student performance after COVID-19. So some graph. So here, this blue part is the bottom quintile. So 2019, 2020, so bottom quintile increase, and the second bottom quintile also increase, and the top 3 quintile actually decrease. So maybe they intentionally do not show this top one, but I'm not quite sure, but I suspected that increase a little bit. So the middle part decrease, and all this subject, we see the same pattern. So this low performer actually increase. Okay, so that is also true for high school. So Korean, math, and the English. So some polarization we observe using this official government data. Okay, and in section 4, very simple exercise I did using the student score. So actually I can. So this is some economic development course. So I have usually student more than 80 students. So 90 something and the 80 something student take their this course in fall 2019. So before COVID, and the fall 2020. Okay, so I have all the row score. So I can put this distribution of 2 courses in one graph. So I can put this graph. And what I see is this solid line, this red one, I call this red one is 2020, and this green one is 2019. And what happened is this middle part actually becomes smaller, and some of that go to top part and lower part. Okay, so this polarization actually happened. So I can visualize that pattern here. So, all right. So why that happens? So my guess is about the key factor is motivation. But let's try to look at this some aspect of interactions and some background and the effect. And then now I want to talk about some policy response necessary to deal with this polarization of education after COVID-19. Okay, so teacher involvement, we have less, and but we have opportunity or some new technology that can allow some customized education for each student. And to have this benefit, what we need is, so this is a term actually coined by Juho Lee. Okay, so he used to be a Minister of Education in Korea, and I think he's kind of quite active in international side. And what he argued is, as we have advanced technology that can be used in education, that technology side cannot actually guarantee some better output and better some distributional outcome. What we need is some kind of high touch. So high touch is some kind of teachers should have a more involvement with the student and try to give some guidance. And the role of teacher now become a kind of advisor and the coach for each student. And the very basic learning can be done by AI, but some advance and some motivation of student and some inequality due to family background, all these other some aspect should be say dealt by the teacher and the student, I mean the school. Okay, so HT. And also we need teacher training. So when I first started this online teaching, actually I had a hard time. So I have some difficulties, and sometimes mic doesn't work, some very strong noise coming in, and sometimes I just lost what I recorded and so on. So new technology, new training, and some new equipment, and so on. Okay, and to have this kind of new technology coming in and work positively, we need this new infra investment. So we need to have internet. Stronger internet connections, and also we need to develop some kind of AI tutor, and so we need that. Okay, so and the student motivation, I think this is the key factor. So what we need is strengthen school and the teacher's responsibility to motivate poor performers. So, and what I suggest is not that strong that is done in the United States. Say in the United States, we have no child left behind that kind of policy. So teachers have too much responsibility about the student performance and so on. And there is some kind of negative effect coming from that one. I think that is my reading of what happened in the United States after this No Child Left Behind this law. And not that strong, but still we need some kind of diagnosis of what happened. And we need to provide a strong incentive to students and the teachers and school about this poor performer, poor motivator. I mean, some student with a poor motivation. So I think we need to strengthen this national assessment of educational achievement. So we need to maybe enlarge the sample of students, and we need to provide say more financial resource to deal with that outcome and so on. And recently, I think the Ministry of Education actually changed this form of national assessment of educational achievement so that students can take this exam voluntarily and open that voluntarily taking this NAEA to all students. So they try to change the policy so that we can have that kind of voluntarily participation by the student to all the students who wanted to participate. So they are discussing that policy change in Parliament, and maybe next year, maybe we can have that kind of things, okay, and so on. All right. And peer group interaction, I don't think this online education can replace offline education. We need offline interaction. So I want to see my student physically, see, and also the interaction among students is key for human. Okay, so we are social animals, so we need some socialization and some creativity and some strong solidarity among people and so on. And all this cannot be come from online interaction. So offline interaction we need. And the role of parents become important, not only in terms of income, but also this parents' involvement. So what we need is maybe we can just have some kind of public provision of internet access for all students, and also some connecting device, we need to provide it, and also some space for that one. So I heard some news article saying that we have a very large budget for this lowering some educational gap after this COVID-19. So I had the budget size is something like almost $5 billion US. Okay, so I think we need to utilize that budget for this access, and also I think we need to develop this AI, some technology, and also we need to provide some responsibility system for school and teachers. And my experience working as a public official in the education.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Professor Lee.
Okay.
We have time is, I can give you 2 more minutes. Could you wrap it up?
Okay, thank you. So I think what is important to deal with this poor performer in student is whole school should move. So not single teacher can deal with that problem. So whole school should work as a team and provide some motivation to students from multicultural family and the low-income family. So that should be done. Thank you. Thank you for attention. Okay.
Oh, thank you very much, Professor Lee, on an excellent presentation. And also, I have to remind the presenters today that because of time management, the role of the session chair is telling you for a presentation is up to 25 minutes, and for a discussant is up to 15 minutes. And I'm sorry to whenever I interrupt you abruptly, but please keep this in mind for your presentation and for your discussion. Time limit is 25 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for a discussant. And if time allows us, in the end of the discussion, we're going to have some Q&A section among the presenters and the discussant, and if possible, from the participant in this seminar online. Okay, let me move to the second presentation by Mr. Chung-Ang from Korea Education and Research Information Services. His topic is ICT and Future Education. Mr. Chung, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. 안녕하세요. 저는 한국교육학술정보.
Hello, everyone. I am Director Chung Sang-Young of Korea Education, Information and Research Services. First, I would like to make a small apology because the things that I have experienced so far and my insights, there are many insights for me, and for clear delivery of my speech, I'm going to speak it in Korean, so please. I'd like to express my apology. First of all, I am honored to be here today on this webinar. Also, the panelists and speakers from in and out of Korea have come to this webinar, and I hope my presentation give you an insightful information. The topic that I'm going to talk about is pandemic and ICT and the future education that will use this ICT. So the major focus will be about new normal and on-tech society. And the second will be about why do we need to use ICT in education and how are we going to use the ICT in the future. Lastly, I'm going to talk about how the future education will change depending on the ICT utilization. In the previous presentations, there have been various talks about artificial intelligence, so I'm going to also focus on AI as well. This slide was not included in the PPT files that I sent earlier. So for the visitors who have come today may not be familiar with CARIS. So I'm going to explain about the rules of organizations in Korea. The CARIS that I am working right now is Korea Education, Research and Information Services. We are an organization under Ministry of Education, and we take care of all the ICT related affairs. And there is KADI, the Korea Education Development Institute, and there's Korea Institute for Curriculum and Evaluation that evaluates and assesses the education, and CRIBET. These three organizations are under Prime Minister's Office and under Ministry of Education. We have CARIS and National Institute for Lifelong Education, NILE. And these two organizations promote affairs and policies regarding Ministry of Education. So CARIS, which I am working in right now, have recently focused on education management revolution, EMIS, and we are now processing and managing this EMIS system. And the major focus of is NICE, and also there is K-Edify that deals with financial budgets of schools. And regarding education and classrooms, we have e-classrooms that deals with e-platforms, and K5CW that deals with college online education. Apart from education, we also provide financial support to university professors and faculties, and which is RISS that provides papers and facilities for professors in universities. So these were the brief introduction of CARIS. So starting from last year, with the onset of COVID-19, new normal society and on-tech society has begun. The traditional classrooms in the before COVID has become meaningless, and instead, this new platform called EduTech, which utilizes technology, has risen to the surface. This is a hybrid types of technology, both online and offline, and hybrid technology will be the major platform for the future as well. So the presenters also talked about the infrastructure and online platforms in Korea. Already, Korea, starting from 1996, we have implemented master plans for advancement of education and online platforms. So in this COVID-19 era, EduTech and remote learning will become the new normal, and that is my prospect. So in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, on-tech platform and education is becoming the new normal, and this system is transforming the education overall. After COVID-19, including this remote education by utilizing EduTech, the cost that we have been spending for the traditional education will be reduced dramatically, and many people will be able to get online education, reaching democratization of education, and various global organizations are now trying to reach SDG goals, and we'll be able to aim for that SDG goals as well. And one of the new education paradigm is learners' experience, and we will be able to share the experience of the learners. And by using this experience, we'll be able to expand the overall education system and scope. And as futurist Jason Sanker mentioned in his book, The World After COVID-19, I believe that we need to respond to post-COVID era in terms of education. Right now, Korea is also implementing remote education. There are three types of education. The first one is real-time two-way class, just like we are doing right now. For example, Zoom that we're using right now, Google Classrooms. And there are similar platforms here in Korea, such as Kurumi. There are various online platforms, and we are going to utilize these online platforms for real-time two-way class. And in order to take class anywhere, anytime we want, there's this content-based class. And the final type is when these two class formats cannot be provided, we're going to use assignment-based class format. So if we look at the advantage and disadvantage of these three types of remote education, the content-based classroom has the most advantage. So in terms of accessibility and quality of contents and time and confirming the output, as well as utilizing social media tools, are all parts and elements of content-based class. But still, the real-time two-way classes are being taken prevalently across the nation. In the year 2020, Ministry of Education and CARIS made a research on the current status of remote education from July 29th to August 1st for the 4 days. And we researched 800,000 faculty, students, and parents. Now I'm going to talk about the result. The advantage of remote education for teachers were that it enabled sustainable and unstoppable learning. And teachers were able to participate in class anytime they want. So the flexibility was the major advantage. For students, they were able to safely take class away from COVID-19. So it was really good for the student safety. And second, because they did not have to go to school, the convenience element was really stood out. And lastly, students were able to repetitively study what they wanted to study, which are impossible in offline classes. And for the disadvantage of remote education, for teachers, they wanted to motivate the students to participate more in the classrooms, but this was difficult. And preparing classroom contents was also difficult, and giving feedbacks was the major drawbacks. And for the disadvantage of remote education for students, they were not able to concentrate well in the classrooms, and they had difficulties communicating with teachers. In particular, students had difficulties using technological devices and express fatigues when studying online. Then what are the positive impacts of remote education? And as students were accessed with new types of online platforms, we were able to overcome the drawbacks of the traditional classrooms. Most of all, the policymakers and for the teachers, what was remarkable was that the self-directed skills of students were increased by almost as close to 70%. In particular, in Korea, many students lack self-directed learning, and many students are relying heavily on private education. So self-directed learning, which is vital for future education, is now being enhanced thanks to remote education. So our researchers and ministries and departments are thinking that remote education can play a positive role in self-directed learning. Next, moving on to remote education and contents. For teachers, they thought the self-made contents that was made previously were rather useful, but for teachers who were in 20s and 30s said that their self-made contents were useful. Many students, however, replied that they were more they showed more satisfaction with the self-made contents of teachers. So we have looked at the positive sides of remote education so far, but the major drawbacks were that teachers, when they were conducting remote education, about 80% of them said that learning gap has been widened. So this problem is the most serious issue that we must solve. And OECD is also now responding to remote education in order to guarantee the learning rights of students. And right now, the COVID-19 situation is now getting better and better, but we are not sure when this will be finally end. So we need to come up with potential platforms for students and teachers in the future. And in order to improve remote education, we also conducted several research. And according to the research, we realized that many schools needed to be independent and have autonomy in conducting remote education, and many schools were confused with how to evaluate students as they conduct remote education. So many replied that there should be a firm standard for evaluation process. And the government also thought about what support can they give for teachers, and that was the platform and contents. Many teachers needed platform support as well as educational contents. So in the midst of this pandemic, we are now using ICT for online education. In Korea, at the beginning of 1990s, government has highlighted the importance of ICT utilization in education. So after the major innovation in the 1990s, and as the administration changed every time, the government came up with master plan for education, and this has changed every 5 years. In the morning session, Professor Chung-Ang introduced about master plans of Korea, and every 5 years, new technology arises, and every 5 years, we came up with policies by using ICT in the education. So in the beginning, we use things like e-learning, smart learning for students. And if you see here, there's this stagnant period, and there were some stagnant period regarding the teaching and learning. And after Fourth Industrial Revolution, the education policies should have been renewed, but due to the outbreak of COVID-19, the online education has been accelerated. Everyone now uses platform education as a major platform. So now we are using AI and big data within our education realm. So I think using AI and technology will become the major issue in the education. The education paradigm has shifted greatly, and the major reason is because due to third industrial revolution, teachers were the one who had all the information. And many students relied heavily in teachers, but with the adoption of internet and computers, students were able to choose teachers that they want. So after the third industrial revolution, students were able to choose from multiple teachers. Now, with the beginning of fourth industrial revolution, we were able to use various platforms. So we distributed AI assistant to every teacher. So with the cooperation of teacher and AI assistant, these partners were able to teach and lead students in the classrooms. So we need to be prepared for AI education as well. Starting from the beginning of 2001, there are about 21 cyber universities across the nation. And the major exemplary model is Korean National Open University. And in 2000, there were about 230,000 students in this open university. Right now, there are about 150,000 students in the open university. And in terms of expansion of online lectures, we have this service platform for KOCW and KMOOC. So last year, with the onset of COVID-19, we have adopted these platforms robustly. Korea had these technological fundamentals, and we announced two major policies. But these two policies lost power as time went by. And one of that two policies were cyber home learning in 2004. It was adopted in 16 education offices across the nation, and students were able to study in home through online. And this cyber home learning was also awarded as an exemplary model. But we had difficulties managing this cyber home learning. So starting from 2018, we have incorporated this cyber home learning into e-learning center. So we are now trying to centralize these various e-platforms. And as Professor Young mentioned, the Smart Education Promotion Strategy was announced in 2011. At the time, there were issues about online education, and there was also issue of utilizing digital education contents and textbooks. But when it comes to applying these digital textbooks into our real classrooms, there were some issues related to financial issues and budget issues. So we were not really able to practically utilize and adopt the digital textbooks in classrooms. But come to think of it, I think right now the policies are being implemented accordingly. So now I'm going to explain about the technologies for future education. Right now, Korea is having difficulties related to college entrance exam, and because we are doing curve grading system, many students are having difficulty competing with one another. And we have some job mismatching issue as well. And also, although ICT literacy is essential right now, the school is not providing adequate education for those elements. So in order to address these problems, I'm going to talk about the major challenges and tasks. Many people are already saying that artificial intelligence era has now begun. And with the evolution of AI and algorithms, we are already using artificial intelligence in our daily lives. So the gap between those who use AI and those who don't will be shown in the education as well. And in terms of education, there are about 80% of gap between using AI and those who do not use AI. For example, for the students who use AI and for the students who don't use AI, they have differences in consuming the information that they have learned. So for those students who achieve the information quickly, they will become the winners of the future, and they will get more wealth and power. So we have to think about how we should process AI education nationwide. AI education can be divided into two parts. First is computational thinking and education for contents. And also, the service that supports teacher methodologies in education will be the second one. So the context about AI education, I'll skip this part. Now I'm going to talk about the AI education. Okay. So the most important thing in education is mutual interaction. AI will facilitate mutual interaction in education, and it can also enhance the determination of students in education. So there are some people who say that we need to change the curriculum in the AI era. And if we are to achieve that goal, we need platforms and contents that support the AI education. So because I'm running out of time, I'm going to discuss the application of AI within our education service. The government is now developing various educational tools for students' learning, and we should develop even more tools in the future. And students and teachers should also use artificial intelligence, therefore reducing the repetitive works. Also, by using AI platforms, students and faculties can interact with one another. So in order to prepare for these future of AI era, we are now trying to reform most of the education in the future, and we prioritize the ethics of students the best, and we also need to think about the career. So we have to also secure more facilities and infrastructure for classes. And fundamentally, we have to come up with integrated platforms for faculties and students as well. We are also thinking about our independent platforms, but there are also several issues that cannot be resolved by one single college. So universities should cooperate with one another to solve those issues. So by these connected platforms, I think colleges can help one another. So right now, Ministry of Education and CARIS is coming up with various policies for that. Finally, in terms of policies, we have to promote hybrid education and utilize artificial intelligence. These are the major policies that we need to come up with. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Director Chung. And thank you very much for your very, very hard information and data in Korea's case. And next presenter will be Dr. Chung-Ang from Chung-Ang University. And the title of the presentation will be via virtual reality, archiving borders in shutdown during pandemic. Professor Chung, could you?
Okay, can you see my screen or can you hear my voice? Yeah, thank you. Hello, this is Woo-Hyung Chun, working at the ICT Research Center in Chung-Ang University, as being introduced by Professor Yang. Thank you. Starting this semester, for the first time in Korea, a major of global border studies has been opened in the GSIS. This major aims to foster experts who will lead the future of reconciliation and coexistence through cross-border cooperation, along with the research on borders and borderlands. One historian described the unprecedented pandemic as a word that has stopped for a while. This pandemic has caused many changes around the world. One of the most noticeable is the closure, shutdown of borders, and the other is the ban on gathering. This webinar, which is held today, is talking about the emergence of online education and build up for new educational environment under these two conditions. My presentation will also talk about the methodology and new educational methods of border studies that will break through closed borders and band sets. This is not because this situation will have improved, but because it is necessary to further develop advantages such as online education. Even if the border was shut down, the border and borderlands were not easy to access. This is because the border area was tied up with the security and military areas, limiting public access. As a result, we don't know much about borders and borderlands. Although many borderlands around the world are still military areas, the area has recently been transforming into more multi-scholar scapes. Global border studies need to track these changes and use it as a basis to seek cross-border cooperation. However, the problem with this situation is that many people are not allowed to visit there together. From the perspective of global border studies, the current situation has problems in that it makes borders further away from us. It is urgent to place borders and borderlands in front of us and track current changes. In addition, it is necessary to consider building up an interactive educational environment for professors and students, not a unilateral top-down explanation of professor, which is currently pointed out as the limitation of online education. This presentation would like to propose a VR, virtual reality, education platform as an alternative to this. This presentation will be conducted in the order of explaining the new theme of the global border studies and suggesting the possibility of a VR as a platform to educate it. Previous presentations are much informative and statistical and scientific, so I learned a lot, so thank you. But my talk will be just a story. Okay. The global border studies aims to observe the people and their lives of the most marginalized border areas in our society and seek ways to coexist to everything that exists. So the people and their lives, they are no longer lonely.
Dr. Chung, could you move on to the next slide? We are watching the first slide.
Sorry. Can you see that?
I think you need to change the presentation mode. This mode is about on the screen. We only just do for the.
We just see the title.
You just see a first title page, yeah. Or?
That's right, the first title page.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
How about this?
You're watching, yeah. Okay,
thank you. Okay. Yep. The global border studies aims to observe the people and their lives and escapes of the most marginalized border areas in our society and seek ways to coexist everything that exists. So the people and their lives there are no longer lonely as they are up to now. So this measure is in line with the Leaving No One Behind presented by the UN's SDG agenda in 2016. And as I told at the beginning, I would like to pay attention to VR's interaction as a way to further visualize these goals in the educational field. VR is still unfamiliar to us, but it's no longer just a game controller, and it is a fairly immersive media. Border study is a question about the types of society, culture, and subjectivity produced by borders and borderlands, and a question about the thinking system and methodology involved in this production process. It is clear that it was locations of conflict between regions, ethnicities, and the countries as well, and is still an extension of it. So the possibility of a 0 point for reconciliation and coexistence also exists. Because the border and borderlands are archive of ecology and daily life, as well as the history and culture before the border appeared, and a community that has protected life at the forefront of the post-border crisis. The border is a media that preserves history, culture, ecology, and daily life before and after the border, and the expanded border aims for life as a politics and a movement of representation. For the legend, the border is a message that mediates the transition of life and thought before and after the border. To quote Marshall McLuhan's old message, media is a message. The border is a media, and therefore a message that enables the transition into a new life and thought. And border is événement in French. In body of thought means not reversible. So the border is not a place that alienated or immutable, but it is always a movement linked to the starting point of some changes. So we need to observe and record the starting point of these changes. This is because cross-border cooperation should begin on this record, not only on the history of the past when borders were appeared. The transition to expanding the border from place to media and movement is meaningful in that it makes us face the multi-scale of boundaries that exist in our lives. The unprecedented border closure caused by COVID-19 clearly shows how many boundaries we have been on. Border closures constantly reveal the boundaries that flow beyond the boundaries between countries, such as culture and civilization, race, gender, religion, and class. The border is likely to be a multi-scale methodology that tracks changes and cracks in boundaries while visualizing invisible things such as boundaries in our daily lives. When the border is approached through media and movement, the view of this study is not limited to some specific places, but rather captures the border as a fluid, starting with the records and memories of the border and recognition and reconstruction of the border. Even if the world seems to have stopped for a while due to the pandemic, conflicts between borders are still noisy. Even now in Afghanistan, they run to the border or airport or next door to escape their children from their country. The borderscapes, which will be introduced in this presentation, makes the border an alternative space and a dynamic framework of thought that clearly reveals the limitations of nation state or ethnic community and dichotomous thinking. This approach is meaningful new challenges in that it is the beginning of embracing the border into our lives instead of leaving it as an eternal others. Sorry. On this screen, there are three interesting photos that are not well known yet. Multi-scholar changes in the borderscapes are just the beginning. Right picture, with Vanquish setting up the World of Hotel in Bethlehem, installed in 2017 near barriers between Palestine and Israel. And first picture, Kita Total Walls, composed of pink seesaws, was installed on the border between the US and Mexico in 2019. It is said that this location became a very hip tourist spot, 사진 맛집 in Korean these days. Art Hotel Remaker in Gosong, Gangwon-do, rebuilt in May 2021. We need to visit and record these places. If we want to go, see you in the GBS class. In addition, we think the official talk between the two Koreas has been cut off since 2018 and 2019, but cooperative talk for ecological preservation, such as forests and oceans between the two Koreas, was held online just last week. Multi-scholar borderscapes make the border a nearby subjective place, not a distant space for others, and make the border more common by combining the city before the border with the future of the cross-border. Global border studies is closely linked to discovering multilateral and multi-scholar borderscapes in the end, and social practices that create various platforms that will reveal the values of reconciliation and coexistence. What is VR? If you take a quick look at the history of media, VR is a comprehensive media of recording, performance, cinema, interaction, and participation or presence. The first thing to pay attention to VR in the global border studies is presence. This suggests two possibilities. First, it makes you realize borders and borderlands with limited access much lively. There is a fundamental difference from accessing text or photos. Text and photos keep observers away from borders or borderlands, but VR keep them stands in that location. I would like to look at the VR movie making film, but I think not enough time, so I just suggest you Google and watch it. Director Alejandro González Iñárritu, Carne y Arena in English, Flesh and Sand, 2017 release. The director is also a director of the so famous movie, The Revenant. I think you have seen that film, and Birdman, and a judge of the Cannes Film Festival who gave the Palme d'Or to Bong Joon-ho's Parasite also. It makes you realize the border between the United States and South America, which consists of endless deserts and surveillance. In this respect, this presence has a second possibility in that it develops itself, not someone's presentation. As I mentioned earlier, research and education on borders and borderlands needs to start with our own experience now, not relying on the representation and ideologies created by someone in the past. The second is interaction. Just as professors and students investigate the site together and produce the results, they can build, cross-review, and modify data on the history and culture of borders and recent multi-scholar borderscapes changes in virtual spaces. The third is a cinematic performance. VR movies can be produced using new narratives and realistic effects on borders. Imagine that a VR movie is made every semester. All students will have a chance to be Bong Joon-ho. This VR movie will make us experience borders as more familiar spaces. The fourth is network. It provides a platform that people around the world can access, compares it with other information about each borders, or aggregates those information in one virtual space. Research and educational resources that can be used anywhere, everywhere in the world are created. And lastly, it's an archive. Starting from the DMZ, you can map data on the history, cultural, ecology, and scapes of borders around the world, as well as build a realistic archive that can track and experience changes. You can see some still shots at the bottom. In 2020, our research center produced the late Professor Kim Seok-cheol's Two-Man River Transnational City at the border between North Korea, China, and Russia project as a VR film, Being City. I was a producer. This transnational city project has stopped in the conceptual stage. The reason why this unrealized city plan was made into a VR movie was because of the nature of the media VR. Like this, VR is a way to escape the real world into something more fantastic. It has the potential to be the most social technology of all time. And using this film as a VR education platform, we would like to build a realistic and fantastic reality of borders around the world through global border studies classes in the future. Of course, VR media is still unfamiliar, and actually contents are inconvenient in some ways. We need a lot of devices. And above all, it is necessary to popularize VR technology so that professors and students can freely make something in it. I think we need to focus on the VR producing we are focusing on developing a VR technology, and we are using it. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much for your interesting presentation on virtual reality in archiving borders in shutdown during the pandemic. Well, because I'm a session chair, I want to put one comment on this virtual reality. Is the technology supporting and enabling the virtual reality is changing so fast, and in a few years, we're going to have a very commercially available virtual reality devices. And I hope that the kind of advancement in technology will help this using new technology in the future education, and also the kind of the job works done by in RCGG research centers in Chung-Ang University. Okay, and now the last presenter of today will be Professor Hyun Myung-ho, so RCGG at Chung-Ang University. The title of the presentation will be Refugee and Education at Al-Darusa's Fund School During Pandemic. Professor Hyun, please.
All right, thank you for introducing me, Professor Yang. And are you guys hearing me well? And do you see my screen this being shared, right?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm Myung-ho Hyun. I'm also from RCCG, just as Professor Chan. Today, I'll present. Well, my presentation might be different from previous presenters, in the sense that it's not about the qualitative study and it doesn't give maybe a broad picture, but I focus on an individual case of this fun school case, 재미있는 학교 in Korean, and it's from a civil group called Altrusa. All right, let me begin. It'll flow like this. It start with the introduction and then I'll move on to the talk about this civil group Altrusa and their the social movement campaign called Living Together with the Refugee. And then I'll move on next to the how this fun school and what this fun school is about, and then how they decide to hire a refugee teacher for their program. And then I'll describe this fun school, just this year in the spring semester, how they operate their program with the refugees to the first time in a Zoom setting, because it's a pandemic years. And then I'll end with this presentation with conclusion. All right, I'll have my script and I'll just read it through. Well, my presentation about refugee and education and Altrusa's Fun School. While Fun School has about 20-year history, I'll focus on its spring semester in 2021, that's this year. This semester is different from previous ones in two ways. It invited a refugee to teach Arabic culture and language and went online due to the pandemic. These new attempts caused much trouble. The refugee teacher does not speak Korean well. The attending 10 students, children under the age of 10 or just a bit older than 10 at the most, did not stay still or stop chattering. The Korean mothers who tried to translate the refugee teacher are of little help because they don't speak the teacher's language either. When the refugee teacher taught the cultural traditions, even the mother grasped just a tiny portion of her speech, let alone the inattentive children. Still worse, because of the foreign teachers' limited access to Korean postal services and computer devices, class material did not arrive on time, and advanced technological feature could not become part of the educational scene of Fun School. If we apply the existing definition of education, that is, a passage of knowledge from a teacher to student and a pedagogical exchange between a teacher and student, the case of Fun School is a fiasco. At Fun School, miscommunication is the rule rather than the exception, with the non-native refugee teacher and the uncontrollable little children. A mother participant confessed that her child at some point blurted out that Fun School is not fun. But the fact that educational failure should not preempt our further probe of the Fun School case. Fun School participants, including the refugee teacher, still want to continue the class meeting next year. Children sometimes do find it fun, especially when they learn about cultural and linguistic differences. While being burdened with sitting with their kids and helping the refugee teacher, mother participants believe teaching their children about cultural difference is important. Even with her broken Korean, the refugee teacher is enthusiastic about teaching cultural difference too. In brief, If a multicultural fun school has any fun, is a new kinds of fun that grew out of the mutual linguistic incomprehension. In other words, the language barrier did not exhaust all the possibility of cultural communication. I'd like to interpret this fun school case from the perspective of border studies. Border studies have already predicted
excuse
that.
me, Dr. Hyun, could you move the slide to the next one, because the script and your slide does not match.
Oh, actually, I'm still talking about this one. So
okay.
I haven't reached this one yet. Okay, so maybe I'm still in the introduction. I'm sorry. I'll go a little faster. All right. Where was I? Oh, the border study already predicted that miscommunication is increasingly becoming routine in our society, as the transnational and transborder movement of people is growing rapidly in the world. This global turn demands our new understanding of migrants, including refugees. The conventional norm is that they need to assimilate to the culture and society of their host country as soon as possible and as much as possible, which will open economic opportunity and guarantee social security for them. This emphasis on assimilation and sameness is still valid. I'm not against it, but an equal emphasis must be placed on the different cultural traditions that they carry crossing borders, so that the migrants can work as a cultural translator. Now I'm moving on to the content 2. That's Altrusa living together with the refugee movement. Let me first introduce what Altrusa is. As a Korea branch of Altrusa International, Altrusa Korea was founded in 1983 to promote the women's mental health and build a good society. In the beginning, its main operation was a social philanthropy, but now its activity have extended to free group and individual therapy sections, and the publication of a quarterly titled D. And D is the pure Korean word for woman, as in 어머니, 언니, and 할머니. While this civic group targets individual women's wellness, it takes a social approach. The idea is that a person's psychological well-being is closely related to social engagement, as individuals and society construct each other. Thus, Altrusa calls itself a social movement and has also engaged in several social activities like being a sister movement and World Without Nuclear Power movement. In a similar vein, in 2015, Altrusa launched another social engagement in the refugee question under the name of Living Together with a Refugee. Altrusa declares that they do not see refugees as just the poor people who need help. Instead, refugees are brave people who resist the social injustice in their home country and confront the hardship of all kinds in the host country. One member testifies that helping refugees also help them realize the broad spectrum of life, and thus help them putting their life challenges in perspective. Following this principle that refugees are not the object of pity, but friends to share life with, Altrusa's campaign focuses on organizing venues to listen to refugees' voices. They were first introduced to refugees through NGOs like Pinan. This is the homepage of Pinan, a civil group, a long-standing organization that helps refugees find an affordable place to stay, medical institution and consultation they need, and community to socialize. Altrusa first organized its refugee talk series in 2016 when it invited a refugee lecturer to talk on the comparative perspective of marriage. It also invited the North Korean defectors. When the refugee from Yemen became a hotly debated issue in 2018, it asked for a talk to an academic specialist on refugee question from Yonsei University. Altrusa organized a round table too, where invited refugee guests take turns to discuss refugee questions in Korea. published in 2018, the refugee friend I met in Korean, 내가 만난 난민 친구들 right here. Is a book. Is the product of Altrusa's engagement with the refugee issue in Korea. In the book, the author, Yoo Sun-hee, Altrusa's former coordinator and one of the most devoted members, record how she, who used to have the common prejudice of refugees as a simply poor people, became aware of them as fellow and friends. It introduced the episode where refugees demystify their stereotypes in Korean society. That a refugee is not supposed to talk only about the refugee question in public discussion. That a refugee is not just the one who gets help from other people, but also does want to help other people. That refugees are proud people with self-confidence, not ready to deceive their nationality as American to just get an English teaching job. In her interview with the author, I realized how she interacts with the refugees with a full range of human emotion, including sympathy, frustration, and admiration. For Altrusa members, refugees are friends worth of our sympathy and respect. This latter feeling of respect seemed to be the one of the common reaction from those who have engaged in refugee question for a long time. One coordinator from Pinan, the NGO group again, also mentions her admiration for refugee people's courage to oppose their own government and not lose their human dignity during challenging times in a host country. With a human respect, Altrusa members are ready to hear more from their refugee friends. And one of such opportunity came with this other program called Fun School or 재미있는 학교. Now I move on to explain how Altrusa's refugee movement met this Fun School program. Begun in the late 1990s, Fun School is an educationally oriented meeting for Altrusa's members, many of whom are married women with kids. It meets every 2 weeks, and each meeting, an Altrusa's member becomes a teacher and organizes the day's class. Sometimes the teaching assignment is a semester long and has a specific topic. For example, physical activity, mock presidential election, and friends' house visits for elementary school kids. Fun School teacher is usually a mother member of Altrusa, and students are their children above preschool age. Fun School appears like a communal child care function for mothers' meetings, but Altrusa's intention is not. It discourages mother members from sending their children only and do not show up. So mother members are supposed to be present at Fun School too, which sometimes result in the participation of their preschool kids too. While Fun School does not substitute the public school, it pursues educational goals in a fun way, which a public school often fails. In sum, Fun School remains true to Altrusa's spirit, that is, social participation makes mentally healthy individuals. Many of Fun School participation in Altrusa are not necessarily members of the Living with a Refugee campaign. It was thus unexpected when a suggestion appeared on joint meetings between two programs, that's Fun School and the Living Together with the Refugee. At first, the meetings took the form of outdoor activities outside classroom. For instance, Altrusa's member organized a picnic at Changdeok Palace with the refugee families. One participant in the outing later recollected that while taking a walk around the Korean palace, one of the refugees started to talk about Arabic palaces for comparison. On another occasion, they went to a water park, as you see in the slide. They went to the water park together and had a barbecue party. These outings gave both sides good memories. A child participant become fond of hijab culture, while one refugee mother felt belonging to the Altrusa community. After the socialization, Altrusa members began to think of a fun school with a refugee teacher. One of their first picks was a Silla. This is a pseudonym for this particular refugee. And her name is Silla. I'll call it Silla in this presentation, who enthusiastically explained the Arabic palace during the Changdok Palace picnic and cooked the most delicious Iraqi barbecue at the water park outing. They also invited her to a one-time class and fun school where Silla introduced her and her family and some Arabic culture. And they got a very positive response from the children, as you see on the slide. And the children's very interested in the Iraqi culture and asking about the Iraqi schools and the Iraqi flag and Iraqi culture, something like that, as you can see on the slide. So let me introduce Silla a little bit more. Graduate from a teacher's college, she served as a teacher and principal of a public school in southern Iraq for more than 15 years. Proud and vocal of Arab culture, her day begins with the bowing to Mecca and reading Quran. She still converses with her children in Arabic, worrying that they start to forget their mother tongue. Under her influence, her daughter still also decided to wear a hijab. Silla loves teaching, but her visa, called humanitarian visa or humanitarian stay status, prevents her from getting a teaching job. This visa only allows its holder to get a simple manual job, does not provide any social benefits and security, and is thus often called a non-humanitarian visa. Therefore, Altrusa's offer of a voluntary teaching job and fun school on Arabic language and culture was a welcoming one for Silla. She accepted the task without hesitation. There was a much preparation for this first attempted multicultural course at fun school. Silla does not speak Korean very well, nor do fun school mothers speak Arabic. It used to be Silla's 3 children who translated between them after attending Korean school for years and speaking Arabic at home. They are fluent in both languages. But as the children had grown older and reached puberty, they are not very cooperative anymore. Fun school members had a series of meetings to discuss the language barrier. There was no particular solution except for using as much English as possible, for which both sides had some common knowledge. Still, given that the target students are little children between 8 and 12, they hope visual material and sound would compensate for the verbal miscommunication. And if it becomes necessary, they could also rely on technology such as Google Translate. But one more fundamental challenge was waiting for both fun school and Silla, the COVID-19 pandemic. Now I'm moving on to the pandemic day fun school with the refugee teacher. The pandemic induced the social distancing policy made every education online since early 2012, as we all know. The biggest problem for fun school was that little students neither stayed still nor stopped chattering. True, it has always been hard to control little students, even before the current pandemic. But in pre-pandemic days, a classroom with the rigid spatial arrangements effectively put children in their seats. In the Zoom setting, this becomes particularly challenging as they are now in their homes, not the place primarily for education, but comfort and relaxation. It is why sometimes they are gone without leaving any hint of where to go or when to return. Being exhausted with their squirmy children, the mothers had a little energy left to ensure the class go well as planned. The Zoom setting is not preferable for Silla, the refugee teacher as well. Having no laptops but on your smartphone to connect Zoom, the refugee teacher has a little access to advanced technological features like a Google Translate, sharing a screen, or playing multimedia. Given that the teacher was also online at home, she also had to deal with the problem of undifferentiated spaces. For her, home is the living space and life as a refugee is very hard. Staying home constantly reminds her of the economic hardship. In a class preparation meeting through the Zoom, she cannot help talking about that hardship, which at one time disrupted her speech and baffled the other participants. Class material preparation was exceptionally challenging, and the following is a case in point. Silla baked 100 Iraqi cookie, camel and lampshade, for cookie decoration class at fun school. Since she has a trouble using the Korean postal service, one coordinator of Altrusa received the cookies through a quick delivery service. The coordinator then packed the cookie in separate boxes with the chocolate pen for decoration and mailed them to each child's home. One of the children had just moved on the day of the package arrival, so there was another time delay. When the cookie finally arrived, many of them were broken into pieces. And language was a real issue too. Silla's better in Korean reading and writing, as all intellectual foreign language learners do, but not yet conversant with Korean. That difficulty worsens in the Zoom environment, which cannot transmit all the non-verbal expression. But we must also appreciate the moment of mutual consideration and togetherness that fun school brings. It happens in Silla's class on Arabic alphabet. It was hard to repeat after her, and even the single phonic of Arif, Arabic equivalent to A, was hard to pronounce and memorize. At this very moment, both Silla and fun school children and parents share the trouble of learning a foreign language. Just as Silla repeatedly said, Korean is difficult, children and mothers felt Arabic the same way. But not understanding the word's meaning did not prevent the children from enjoying their sound. Giggling, they recited Assalamu alaikum and Habibi, meaning hello and I love you, like a fun song all day even after class. The children seem to learn not the language itself, but the fact that they all share feelings and Arabic is fun for its sound. Differences are always good topics to discuss in any multicultural class, and fun school is no exception. In one class, Silla talks about the difference between Iraqi and Korean schools. Children were drawn into the fact that in Iraqi elementary school, students go to school very early, like by 7 a.m., and eat breakfast together with the classmates and teachers. Silla appreciates children's question, all the question about Iraq. Children ask very simple questions like whether Iraqi food is good or have you eaten Korean food, something like that. Some might ask a more subtle question about the hijab culture, and Silla likes that too. Interestingly, the language barrier did not quench Korean students' interest in Arabic language. One child said to a mother that she wanted to learn Iraqi language instead of English. Silla was very happy about hearing that, adding some more information about Arabic language that is being used in 28 nations in the Middle East and have a different dialect in each country. And even a daughter who speaks Arabic very well would not understand Egyptian or Syrian Arabic. I'll wrap up this presentation now, moving on to conclusion. True, Altrusa cannot help Silla with the visa or refugee status application. The PINA, the other NGO organization, will help that, yet without any guarantee. Silla repeatedly said that she does not want other support, but she want to get a job to support her family by herself. It is a wish that would not come true very soon, unfortunately. Still, Silla agrees to continue teaching Iraqi culture for fun school next year. She'll produce 5-minute video introduction of Arab history and culture for youth group this time. Decided to support Silla with the computer, and the fund came from archers and members' donation, as they had done couple times before. Children of Fun School wrote letters to Silla's children to say hello. Silla agrees to the suggestion of a regular meeting between a trust member and a family. Despite all her and her family's uncertainty during this time, education seemed to provide her a certainly enjoyable moment of life. In my own interview with the Silla, as you can see in the slide, which again did not go very well because of the language barrier, Silla proudly showed me an Aladdin lamp-shaped key ring making kit, which she'll use for future classes at Fun School. She really think Fun School is fun at this moment. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for Professor Chung. And I personally didn't check the time because of my personal recent interest in refugee issues in Korea. Okay, before we move on to discussion, are we going to have some time to take a photo for all the participants? Can you take a photo right now? So turn your cameras on, please. Turn your cameras on and be ready for, we're going to capture the screen for okay. Okay, are you ready for, okay, 3, 2, no, okay. 3, 2, Professor Chu, I cannot see you. You have to put your, okay, face, all right. And Professor 1, I cannot see you. All right, okay, let's take a photo. 3, 2, 1, cheese. One more time. Okay, one more time. Professor Chu. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. Okay, and now we're moving on to a discussion, right? And a Professor Jin Shil-hee is going to present her discussion. The topic title was Further Considerations for Online Education Post-COVID-19. And she's going to share the experience of professor at graduate school in Korea. Professor Jin.
Thank you, Professor Yang, for that introduction. Before I share my screen, I want to just make some comments about the very informative presentations that were made during this session, as well as the morning session. That photo time actually was a great refresher. Always the afternoon sessions are most difficult. And so thank you for that short break. I want to first thank the fact that we can take stock of the online learning experience in Korea, and the fact that Chung-Ang University is able to host this meaningful conference. So I really appreciate all the organizations for this meaningful experience. I'm also personally very interested in how the affordance of technology can change our lives and make new things possible that were not perceived before. So I just had the opportunity to, before that, I just want to actually, it's part of my human touch, post-COVID-19 human touch effort as a teacher, teaching also here at Chung-Ang University. I want to just compliment and encourage my students who are actually interpreting this morning and this afternoon and tomorrow, all their hard work. So that was just my human touch aspect that I'm really trying hard after this COVID-19 pandemic has hit us. I don't make a lot of personal comments before, but I realize that actually this kind of interaction is really necessary after the COVID-19 and after we've been forced to actually interact online in this way. So I want to make just brief comments about the slides that I had the privilege of reading. And so some of the presentations were cut short because of time limitation today, but I just want to make some comments about these very informative presentations. So about the first presentation on COVID-19 and educational inequality by Professor Lee Yang of Hanyang University, I really found that presentation highly very impressive, especially the HTMT, the high touch, high tech part. We didn't have enough time to cover the very last slide, which I think really contains this important message. The high touch and high tech, these are very two aspects that I think are really what we learn after all the technology development, after all the progress that we can achieve from, expect from the online education. So ultimately, it's about how we can get involved in the education process as instructors through human touch and through the high technology. These two things, I think, can help us go beyond after the post-COVID-19 era. So in his presentation, we saw that there was evidence of clear divide in education at all levels of education, so including the tertiary, which is where I also had experience teaching. So I'm not going to share slides here because it's just comments about the previous slides, but I also have my own presentation. So for your, I guess for your entertainment, I just have my slide on up there. I'm going to just put this slide up here as I make my comments. Okay, great. So, so thank you for that very insightful presentation, especially the phrase from mass production to mass personalization, and the fact that we need to change what we teach. And I was able to recap the fact that it's not COVID-19 that changed the way we view education or our approach to education. We had progress in ICT and education technology before, but the COVID-19 had accelerated the pace of that progress and actually made everyone have direct experience, first-hand experience with online education. And I think that's the change that was brought about by the COVID-19. So thank you for the very informative presentation. The second presentation about ICT and future of education by Director Chung-Ang of Paris. This presentation was extremely informative. It clearly showed the changes that were caused due to the pandemic, the upsides and the downsides of online education and remote learning, the different types of online learning, including both synchronous learning and asynchronous learning, so which have different implications on the education, the applicability. So that was very informative, and different educational technology, the present day education technology, and also how the future is going to unfold in the world of education technology. So it was really informative. And since I had the privilege of looking at his slides before this conference, I really want to emphasize also his last slides, which emphasize that we actually, after all the technological development and after we're able to leverage on all the availability and affordance of technology, we come to the conclusion that we really need to return to humanity. That takes us back in time in history. So the essence of education actually doesn't change. The technology can do many different tricks, and we can really leverage on what it can do. Even during this pandemic, we can continue our education thanks to technology, but it's actually the return to humanity, or the human side of interaction is really important. And I think that's really well emphasized in the presentation. And in the third presentation and fourth presentation, actually, we could feel that education is really an area that encompasses many different fields. And it was so interesting to listen to the Professor Chung-Ang's presentation on VR, archiving borders and shutdown during pandemic. It was interesting because we could get an insight into very new and emerging field of study, which is the border studies. So we could tell we could see how many different disciplines come together and converge in this discipline, and it was really fascinating how VR could allow us access to the contact zones, the conflict zones, and so on. So it's really interesting to see that ICT has the possibility to let us learn in different risky areas, and also areas that are beyond our access. So since Korea has a DMZ, which is beyond access to many people, I think this discipline of study and the lesson on what ICT can do to let us learn things in this new discipline. I think it was a very meaningful presentation. And going to the fourth presentation, the refugee education at Al-Chursa Fund School during pandemic by Dr. Hyun-Myung-ho was really interesting, because we could get a indirect experience of the life of refugee, and also the aspect of language barrier. And since I represent and teach in the area of translation and interpretation, this language barrier, I think it's really an issue, and I try to relate to that language barrier issue in my slides. So I'm gonna talk about that in more detail, but we could see through his presentation that even during this pandemic period, we could continue our education thanks to, despite the limitations, thanks to the affordance of different technologies. So thank you very much for those very informative presentations. I could learn a lot from those presentations. So I will now just go over the 3 key points that I felt we need further consideration when we are thinking of the sustainability of this online education after the COVID-19. Everybody says we're going to change the way education is done after COVID-19, but I think there are certain limitations that we need to overcome and these can be summarized into 3 aspects. First is online presence, the issue of social presence, the feeling that you're actually engaged in learning with other people and interacting with other people during your online class, and the learner experience. So I say learner experience because before the pandemic, it was an issue of acceptance, technology acceptance. People had a certain bias toward the use of technology in the classroom. So that was the barrier prior to the pandemic. But now that everybody in general has experienced what online education can do, despite its limitations, it's now come to the question of learner experience and how to improve that learner experience. So it's not a question of acceptance, but that of improving learner experience in the online education setting. The second one is about accessibility. I think it's also related to the presentations that were made in terms of language and in terms of physical access, and also the need to redesign spaces in order to make online education more accommodating to learner experience. The third aspect is health and safety considerations. I say this because in my profession as interpreter, our profession and industry is heavily affected by this pandemic and the move to the this online mode of conference. And we really have a growing body of research on the safety and health implications of the online setting on the hearing and on the vision and of the human. So I think these three are the key aspects that we need to look at when we think about maintaining or think about the long-term sustainability of the online environment. So I've covered that. I will just briefly mention this because adult learning was also mentioned in the third presentation. So I just want to say that even in very highly practice-based disciplines like translation and interpretation, the experience shows that the students in all 8 categories did not feel that much difference. I mean, that much difference relative, between on and offline education experience. So that was a quite surprising result for us. And in terms of learner satisfaction, also it's interesting because the first year students at this time, they had no experience offline education, so they could not compare. But the second year students, they could compare. And it's interesting because the second year students found that their learner satisfaction was higher than the first year students. So the second year students could compare the offline education experience, the online education experience, and they could, they appreciated the time-saving aspects and so on. So the conclusion from the postgraduate school of translation and interpretation in Korea is that this online experience for everybody, it was an eye-opener and lowered the bias against alternative methods of pedagogy and new possibilities. And also because our professional field, the environment of our professional field changed, it also, the educational setting also replicates their field experience. So it was also meaningful to change the way of learning. Okay. I don't know if I have enough time to go into detail about this, but the issue of social presence, I think it was touched upon under different names throughout the presentation today, but it's really about feeling that you are socially existing in that classroom, that people identify you, people know your name, the teacher knows your name, calls your name. This kind of personal interaction is really important for learner motivation. So in Korea, we also have a stock of data about how to reinforce that social presence, which helps motivate the student in the online classroom. So there are certain, the body of research, there are certain tips to reinforce that, and it's the instructor's role is very important. The first is social respect, appreciating the learner's efforts. The second is social sharing. So the teachers need to share more about their information, make them feel that they exist as teachers, there to guide and motivate the students. And third is open mind, encouraging the students to really build strong social relationship within the online classroom. The fourth is social identity, encouraging awareness of each learner's identity, making sure you call each student by their name before the class ends, for example. So these are the kind of things we can do as instructors. The fifth one is intimacy. So how to promote that intimacy and sharing of personal experience more than before. So so Korea also has a stock of know-how that we're trying to share among the teachers. So these are things that have been identified in the pedagogy, educational approaches, but also there are, as you have seen in the earlier presentations, virtual reality and holograms. Also in the interpreting and translation world, we have experience of this is a case of Europe, but making the students feel like they're, as we have witnessed in the morning session, how the 3D presentation of the virtual studio makes us, temporarily feel that we are there and existing together. So technology can also help us feel that presence in the online classroom. And also the need to redesign spaces to accommodate different needs. As Dr. Hyun mentioned in the refugee case, so the need for single uninterrupted space is really necessary for the students, and also some hubs for the students and learners to socialize so that they can actually meet each other, even though their classes remain online. So the need to redesign spaces. And the third is language accessibility. In the translation and interpretation world, we're working on subtitling, live subtitling, and at times plus live translation through the subtitles. So there are various efforts that are ongoing. The third issue is health, the acoustic shock, the Zoom fatigue, the attention span, and the negative impact on the vision, health of the vision. So these things need to be considered after the COVID-19 has ended, so that we can ensure that our students remain learning, actively learning, and meaningfully learning in the new online environment. So that is all for my discussion. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Jin. And we have one discussion left. Dr. Jo Jae-woo, Research Fellow in KEDI. Dr. Jo, could you please?
Okay, hello, I am Jae-woo from Korean Educational Development Institute. I learned this time as a discussant, but already the Professor Jin provided customized comments on each presentation. I'll do my discussion more informative by reflecting each presentation topics. In this session, the four experts present a variety of the topics related to the pandemic, inclusive education, and ICT. In particular, each presentation explained the opportunity and the new challenges of the education brought about by the pandemic situation based on the relevance of the ICT. As a person who research on online education and ICT and runs a national online educational program, I will continue the discussion today based on that experience. As the Dr. Chung said, Korea is one of the country where online education is widely used. However, the use of online education before COVID-19 is a supplementary use. Online education was used as an additional or in-depth material for the school education, like after-school program. However, the COVID-19 has brought this online education into the school education as a way of continuing education. Through the online opening of the school in Korea, students have used the online classes as an alternative to the face-to-face classes. Through this, we normalize the public education even in the COVID-19 situation. From this experience, we confirm the possibility of online education. Like today's webinar's theme, the online education can be a way to accelerate progress and equality in education. Let's take a moment to look at the law of the education. The document titled Teaching and Learning, Achieving Quality for All, released in the 2014 by UNESCO, says that the education reduces the poverty and boosts the jobs and growth. And education improves the people's chances of the healthier life, and education promotes the healthier society, which means that education is the most powerful and effective way to help develop individuals and society. Therefore, each country has a duty to equitably provide a good education to all of its students for the growth of individuals and the nation. One way to provide equal education opportunity can be using online education. Online education allows all students to have equal access to the quality education by utilizing the ICT. In the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has limited to in-person contact, many countries around the world have delivered education via online education. As such, online education using ICT can increase the equity of the education based on its own strengths, like accessibility. However, as many existing studies have already revealed the online education's limitations. Actually, this was also confirmed in our presentation of this session, kind of the lack of interaction with the teacher, digital distraction, and the technical difficulties widen the learning gap. And it has also been confirmed from this session that there is still lack of the infrastructure to operate online education stably. And also mentions the possibility and the limitation of the new edutech, such as VR. Our experience in online education in the COVID-19 situation presents a task for the using online education in future education. In particular, developing the online education system, the Korean education system, or the training professionals and building infrastructure and preparing legal basis on the basis of the challenge we face it now. My presentation, I want to deliver how to handle these challenges. I think we need to find it from the educational field and from the real world. I believe that Korea has succeeded in using online education in response to the COVID-19. And I think one of the reasons for the success lies in the active use of online education in the public education system. I believe that the experience of using online education in the public education has contributed to stably replacing the rapid transition of face-to-face courses to the online education. Today, I would like to introduce some online education projects that have helped Korea develop its own expertise in using online education. These 5 programs on slide are online education projects that have been operated nationwide since before the COVID-19 by KEDI. These programs are aimed to provide equal educational opportunity for diverse students with limited educational access through online classes. Among these, I would like to introduce the School for You program that I'm in charge of at KEDI. School for You helps students with health impairments who have trouble attending the school due to the chronic disease and continue their studies. Its purpose is to help them continue their studies, ensure they are like to run, and provide the physical, psychological, and emotional support through the online and offline activities, and help them to return to school. This is the goal of the School for You. The School for You program is for the elementary, middle, and high school students who are identified as having a health impairment by Metropolitan and Provincial Office of Education, and who are found eligible for the School for You due to the long-term medical treatment. And more specifically, it is geared toward the students who have a difficult attending the school or studying at school as they need. This slide shows some pictures of the School for You. One of them is the School for You is using the synchronous online course, kind of a real-time online course. Actually, the synchronous online course have been highlighted under the COVID-19 situation. But School for You has already been using the synchronous online courses since 2017. Due to this utilization, we did not have much difficulty using synchronous online course under COVID-19. So this is a kind of some example of how using the practical online program can develop professionals' ability in using online courses. And the other character is the presenter pointed out the problem of the learning gap in using online education. We have also already experienced that, and we are developing various programs to narrow the learning gap in online education situation. For example, we are managing the Learning Plus program, and in Korean, 학습 더하기 program that conduct an online test to diagnose the academic ability and provide customized video contents according to that test result, and provide the individual online counseling to students. This is one example about how to narrowing the learning gap. Regarding to the problem of the online education identified under COVID-19, we are carrying out the practical practice to solve that problem based on our experience in using online education. Recently, we are trying to improve the quality of online education by adapting VR in our synchronous online course. By using VR device and metaverse platform, we are trying to provide a learning experience similar to face-to-face classes in online classes. So this is also connected our presenters' topics. This shows the number of the students who are applied for the school for you by the year. So the number of has been increasing every year. So for health impaired students who are find it difficult to go to school and attend the classes, School for You guaranteed the right to learn and make sure they continue their studies and return to school. This program is just a direct example of how we can use online education in the future. So in wrapping up this session, I'd like to point out a few things. Online education had its own strengths. That is accessibility. So anytime, anywhere, and any device. This strength will be used as the useful way to promote equality in education in the future. In order to utilize these strengths, we first need to think about who needs online education. In the COVID-19 situation, online education was needed to be ensured to all students. In Korea, so all students in Korea, all students in the world, they need the online course to continue their education. But after COVID-19, we have to think about who will need online education. The case I introduced today introduced the use of online education for students who have difficulty receiving the opportunity for the school education. Once the target has been set, we have to think about what we need for the online education and make a practical preparation. Today, our presenters proposed the various policies tasks related to the future use of online education and ICT. It includes the human resource, infrastructure, and legal basis for online education. Preparation for this can be made through the practical practice. As I introduced today, beyond the suggesting just the academic or policy direction, we need to provide online education to students in the world, in real world, and then we identified challenges and solve that challenges that arise in the process of managing that program. The practical experience of using online education will eventually contribute to the establishment of the Korean online education utilized system. Online education is an emerging way of future education, not a temporary strategies used for a while to respond to the COVID-19. I think today's presentation by each presenter will be meaningful data for preparing the use of online education for the future education. Thank you for listening.
Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Do. Finally, we have covered the full presentation and two discussing panel discussions. But we have, as I mentioned earlier in this session, since we have around 20 minutes left until 5 o'clock. So, oh, we have more 30 minutes. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to ask if any presenters, the four presenters, if you have any comment or response or reaction to the comment made by the discussant, I'd like to introduce you. Anybody who
Can I ask a question?
oh yes, please.
Yes, so I have one question. Listening to Professor Jinshiri's comment and listening to Chung-Ang's comment from KOICA, that they find that already the impact of online education is not that much different from the impact of offline education. So, so it sounds very optimistic, but other presenters also mentioned the limitations of online education. So I think we need to more elaborate on the impact of online and offline education, and you need more time to verify that impact. But so far, because you have that kind of result, empirical result, so could you, Professor Jinshiri or 정상훈 연구위원님 from KOICA, or yeah, so it was, I think, very hopeful and interesting outcome. So if you can elaborate a bit, then it will help a lot for us.
양 본부장님 혹시
네네.
네,
들리시나요?
말씀해서 해주시네.
들리시나요? 네. 앞서 그 좋은 코멘트 해주신
Thank you very much
토론자께
for the good comment for discussants.
감사드리고요. 제가 그 말씀해주신 그
As you
긍정
said, there are positive impacts of online education
온라인 교육이 우리 교육에 어떤 영향을 줄 것인가에 대해서
and the impact of online education on our education system. Let me elaborate more on that. In fact,
우리 교육부도 그렇고
the Ministry of Education of Korea and many other institutions are trying to return to in-class education as soon as possible.
그 이유는
The reason of that is that there are some problems related to caring students or students' attention problems or the possible learning loss or disadvantage in the assessment or tests. There's some anxiety over those problems, so many are arguing to return to in-class offline education. However, parents and teachers have seen positive aspects of online education. As I said in my presentation earlier, students' self-directed learning capabilities have improved according to a survey. And as in the survey, when students are studying at home, parents or teachers or even private tutors or another type of assistant would not be needed. Students can study online and achieve some sense of self-directness. We have already seen those senses, and we have to revive that sense. And our researchers and the government have to make effort, but still, yet we don't have enough time to do so. So based on our experiences, we have to think about that. Many researchers have argued this for 20 or 30 years, and we are now trying to achieve this accomplishment within 2 or 3 years. So in universities or colleges, these advantages are now being facilitated, but in elementary schools, now teachers and students now have felt that kind of advantage. So I believe today's policymakers and researchers have to revive the sense of positive feelings about online education and our online education in Korea. That's what I hope for.
To elaborate from my discussion, further to my discussion, actually, so what I was saying in my discussion is that initially, like people like me, we research ways to actually change the way education is done, but it was very difficult because of the people's acceptance of technology. They thought it was something that actually deteriorates the level of education. But because we were forced this new method of education after the COVID-19, also translation and interpretation schools like ours, we had to have forced online 100% online learning environment. So I think after that experience, people realized that it is possible. So people were surprised at the result that it's possible. People were also surprised how fast the students and the instructors are adapting to this new environment. So although we are actually just realizing and finding out this new situation, I think the overall response from the academia in the translation and the interpretation professional school community is that the students are actually, although there are some limitations, they are accepting the situation more positively than before. So for example, the first, for translation and interpretation, there's a slight difference. So I think we may want to, take on the positive applications. So depending on the context, I think we should choose, choose to leverage on the good sides of this online learning. So for translation subjects, they were more positive, but for interpreting subjects, for like in the case of our school, they prefer partly offline education because of the need to learn how to use equipment and so on. So I think we can apply to this depending on the context and choose, select and choose.
Professor Lee, yeah.
All right, so thank you for very insightful comment. And so let me respond quickly to discussing Professor Jin's comment. 네. All right, so I put the slide I skipped when I present because of time limit, and Professor Jin bring up this slide. So I want to just quickly talk about this one. And one thing I want to make clear is that the Lee here is not me, but Joo-ho Lee. Joo-ho Lee, he is the person who coined this high-touch, high-tech education. And he nicely summarized what needed to be taught and how to teach these new curriculums or new skills. Okay. So I think it's a very nice to summarize about we need to know about the data, technology, human resource, so some communication, right? And about the creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and the communication. So very nice, nicely coined some word, okay? And now we need to learn, right? And we need to have some deep learning, and also we need to go some horizontally. I think those are some method to learn, so reflecting some new trend and what is necessary in new economy, right? Okay, and one thing that I add to what Professor Joo-Ho Lee already summarized is that this COVID-19 actually caused the need for teachers' role as a motivator is very important, right? So teachers should work as a motivator for each student, right? Okay, so that is one thing I brought up, and another one is some equity issue, because there's some access to new technology depends on income and some involvement of parents. So we need to have some public system that can actually replace, when necessary, about this parents' involvement and parents' income level, right? So, all right, and Dr. Do actually nicely summarized all the 4 presentations, so I appreciate it, and also present this School for You program, and I'm very pleased to see that this School for You program actually expand and nicely settled down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your response and reaction. Anybody else has a comment on today's presentation? Okay, then, because as a session chair, I'd like to share 1 minute by leaving my impression on today's presentation and discussions. The question I have is, everything. Unknown to us, there are tens of thousands of people are experimenting a new way approaching the kind of education. But the question I have, the impression I had is that education or is that learning? And the other question is, are we approaching this from the supplier side or user side? Or then naturally the question comes down to define a person policy implication as public education versus private education. Do we have education market? Are we going to allow the market works? And ending up this comment, I want to approach this next time. If we have an opportunity, we are going to approach this using what to teach, who to teach, whom to teach, how to teach, and where to teach. And then in terms of policy making, and I think we're going to have good answers and solutions from many areas. And personally, I really thank you very much for all the participants and the presenters and the panelist discussions. And is it okay, can I adjourn the session, even though we have like around 25 minutes left over?
Mega Sama wanted to, yeah, we can give our mic to program manager, Mega Sama from KAS.
Thank you so much. I think it was really interesting today, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And I think, yes, I think I follow your lead in this, Dean Chun. I follow whatever you say. But I really had I learned a lot, and I'm really excited for the regional webinar. I think there is so much to learn from South Korea. And I think you all have brought a lot here. And I'm so happy that we can take this to the region. And I can see so many countries really eagerly waiting to learn from you. And I can see that many of the problems that other countries face, you all have the solution to it. At the same time, things like parents are something that I think you all can also learn, because other countries have a lot of things with parents, which are something which I've noticed, which is not, has been talked about, but there is not much of platforms of discussion on this. But there are countries like Philippines and all who have had a lot of experience on this. So I think it's a gain for both everyone, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you.
그럼 제가 마지막으로 끝낼까요? Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind attention. It has been a long day, but it was very fruitful day. So, okay, so okay, that is all for our session today. So we thank you all of you participating webinar online. Okay, so we hope you have many takeaway from point from today's webinar, and come back tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow at 10 o'clock. So please come around 9:40. So we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.